So at this point, I can only assume, or I'm hoping, that you are completed through Module 3. If you aren't, just like when we did the steps part of Module 3, you could probably still do the bulk of this with us today. And if you're watching the video at home, then you probably are through Module 3, and this is where we pick up in Module 4. So I'm going to quickly go back into Module 3 a little bit, because you could see here, and as soon as I refresh this will be gone, but in Module 4, we're going to learn to start building these boxes like this, these containers, to actually separate our content into spaces inside the site, because until we start doing that, our stuff's just going to look like this. It's all going to be slammed to the left. If you've learned now, as I've shown you, like these little bits and pieces of code that you could go in there and format it to a line in the center, then yes, you could easily fix that, but it still wouldn't be enclosed into these tight little spots, which make things a lot better now that we are in a day and age that a variety of different types of monitors are being used to view websites. And most websites, beyond just using divisions in these containers in CSS that we're going to learn about today, should be responsive, which means they should respond to the size of the screen. So when you're on something like this, right, look up here, the best websites are the ones that automatically know you're on a smartphone, and it doesn't matter which phone, it matters how large your resolution is, the size of your resolution. Okay? So back to the web workshop here. We're going to go back in to the home page and just revisit a couple things quickly here. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I want to make sure from Friday that you guys understand what we learned, because prior to having CSS, which through a large part of the 90s for a lot of web designers, they had to build sites just putting all the code right in line in all these little chevrons, and there was piles and tons and piles of HTML code to make the stuff look the way it was going to look. And then they came up with this code called CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And even though it's not always used in the format of a separate sheet, it's still CSS. And this is a code that enables you to control the presentation and control the look and feel of all your content without having to go into every single page and put it all in line in the body. So I'm hoping you remember this from Friday. I know I see you guys pretty early, but that was what this cascade was about. So what we're going to do primarily now as we move forward and finish up the web workshop is this, the external sheet, okay, which beats any formatting that it's picking up from the browser. So we also looked at the fact that we can go into browsers. Now I'm in Firefox right now, and if I go into Firefox options, in content, the way it looks is it's showing me Times New Roman. Very rarely, if you used Chrome, Explorer, Firefox, Safari, whatever browser you're using, they will all still have this option, even though now, in this day and age, in 2015, like it would be impossible to find a website that was created in the last few years that isn't using CSS to override this, okay, to override what's happening here. So up until this point in the web workshop, well, up until Module 3 actually, we were allowing it to control the way our text looked, for example, and now we're not going to anymore. We're primarily going to use the external sheet. We also learned last week that if you're using the external sheet to control the way the stuff looks in your page, but then all of a sudden you decide, oh, you know what, I said H2 is going to be green everywhere in my site, but on this particular page, I want all of my H2s, my heading 2s, to be black. You would then embed that rule up in the top in the head of the document, which, by the way, is the same place where you embed the link to the CSS file. So if I open up, let's open up index and steps, for example. I have a link right now embedded to the style sheet that we did in Module 3. Okay, if right below that, I embedded another link, sorry, not a link, but another code that that overrode, let's talk about H1, because I was just mentioning H2, but this H1 code, if I put that up there with this link, it would refer to that code first before it goes into this file and asks this file what I want H1 to look like. Because in that file, I'm also formatting H1, right? Or H2, I think, but it doesn't matter which one. You can override it by putting that code in there. And then further to that, we learned that if you put it right in the code, in the body, like into the HTML tag, you actually put the CSS sort of syntax, like the property value. You have the attribute and then the property and the value. That will override the embedded and the external. So that's the cascade. So it's important that you still remember you can beat out or override what you have in the external sheet. If you have a sheet controlling the presentation of your entire website, but you want to change something on one page, you can do that. And if then you want to change something in just part of that page and override the embedded rule, you can do that. But otherwise, the best way to do it is to have it all set up in one sheet, and that's the way we're going to do it from now on through the rest of the web workshop, is it's going to be in one separate sheet. So are there questions about that? You guys remember this from Friday? I know it was like 5 days ago. Okay, so we're going to all go to here. If you have your laptops and you're reasonably caught up, even if you're not caught up, most of the stuff we do in here, you could, like the first 3 things we do are just totally brand new separate files. So you could have done nothing in the web workshop and still jump in and try and do module 4 with us. Okay, so if you have your steps folder, try and build this stuff with me. If you've been working along and you're already up to module 3 and you finished it, then you'll know exactly what we're doing here. So throughout this particular module in the web workshop, I do a lot of really annoying things in the instructions. Like I'll ask you to start a file and name it and put it in a folder and leave it blank, and then start another file and name that one, and then go back to the file you just started. And so as I'm going through the instructions in the video, I might sort of streamline them a little bit so it's less annoying in this lecture for you. But the reason I do that, as always, is to keep you guys attentive and cognizant of your file management. To keep you attentive to and cognizant of, like paying attention to your file management. So starting off the top here, we're going to talk about grouping. So we learned last week that you can take a standard HTML tag like heading 1 and then go into the seagulls, the CSS brackets, okay, and apply property value, always separated by colon, semicolon, colon, semicolon. So every time we put a property, we have a colon. Every time we put the value for that property, we stop it with a semicolon. If you miss these anywhere in your CSS, it really does mess up the entire document. And this is why it's nice that when we're done with the web workshop, we move on to a WYSIWYG platform that manages this for us. But it's also nice that we will have learned enough of this code that we can go into the CSS file in the WordPress platform, for example, find these HTML tags, change them around a little bit, and they'll change throughout our entire site. So here we have heading 1. We've done some stuff to it, and you don't have to go through each of these steps if you don't want to. If you want to just watch me do the instructions and then just fast track right to the bottom, this is the code that you should ultimately have in the file we're going to make called headings.css. So I'll always give you guys the opportunity to kind of fast track or cheat a little bit as long as you pay attention to how it works. So I'm going to start up at the top here, and I'm going to create a CSS document. So as I said last week, I'm going to go with a brand new file. I'm in Notepad++ here. I'm not in Notepad because I decided to download Notepad++ because it's better. I'm mentioning this because I'm recording a video, sorry. You're going to put that CSS comment at the top, and it doesn't matter if that's there or not. The file would still be read. The CSS in the file will still be read. Sorry, I'm bouncing around here. This is primarily there to make sure that whoever opens up that file, if you have other web managers or somebody's dealing with something, they immediately know it's a CSS file. I don't know how they wouldn't know that by the fact that it has .css for the extension, but you put it up at the top so that automatically everything in here is seen as CSS. Whether it's there or not, it wouldn't matter because it's really just a comment. And that's also one of those things, when I'm grading this, I probably wouldn't notice if you missed it or not. After you do that, you're going to save that file to set it up to start putting CSS into it. So go ahead and go File, Save. As always, pay very close attention to where you're saving it. So the last time I saved something in my steps site, I saved it in the main steps folder. This is a CSS file, so it's going to go into step styles. And if you're confused about that, just read the directions, because in the directions I say right here, put it in step styles. This is where the project really starts to go off the rails for students if they don't start paying attention to the simple stuff. Where to save it, what to name it. Okay, you do that right, everything in this module should work out great for you. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. and I'm going to save it as headings.css in the step styles folder. Now, once that CSS file is created, we're going to open up the headings.html file per my instructions that are extremely clear and simple. Because we made headings.html last week already, it should be in there. Okay, so I guess this one isn't quite as jump into steps and start working on it. That might be more applicable to the next few steps. But if you did module 3, you should have headings in there. I think that was module 2, actually.
Yeah.
Edit it, go into the head, and we're going to add a link to a CSS file in there. So nothing about what just happened should be difficult for you guys. We're just cutting and pasting right now to demonstrate that you can group these selectors together. The reason for doing this is a little more complicated, but just put that in there, hit save, and close the file, and then open it in the browser for previewing. So you don't need to actually change anything else. Everything we're going to do here to affect the way these headings look is going to happen in this file. And as you learned last week, because we're linking to this file now, you'll see all those changes take effect. So close that up and open it in your browser, and it should look like this now. I'll zoom that in a little bit. So this is what your headings file should look like from when we worked on it in Module 2. Now, we're going to take some CSS that we learned to do in Module 3 and slap it on here. So that file that we created in Step Styles called headings.css, now we're going to start putting some code into it. So go back to the instructions. Okay, let me close some of this up just to make this a little simpler. Then we're going to put this code in there. So this code is going to change the way H1 looks. So we know we have, we know we have the file linked, but we haven't put anything in it yet. So here's headings.css. Copy and paste it, put it in there, save your changes. As soon as you save your changes, so Control S, go over here, pull up the file and refresh it, this will change. None of the other ones change because I haven't told the browser in my CSS file to do anything else to heading 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've only changed heading 1. Now here's an example of how you can save yourself a little bit of time when you're putting together CSS if you're going to do the same thing over again to other HTML, standard HTML elements. So headings 1 through 6, I decide, hey, you know what? That looks pretty good, Verdana gray, with no background. That's fine. Verdana gray. So these are all simple things that they're not affecting the size of the font. It's just affecting how the font looks and the color of it. So if I go to the instructions, you're going to see that I'm going to say, hey, let's do this to heading 2 as well. But instead of doing this entire code block and pasting it below it and going H2 should also look exactly the same, all you have to do is go comma H2. And now when I save these changes and go and refresh, H2 also takes on that color, that font. Why didn't it change size? Why didn't it change size? You guys tell me.
Because you're telling it to do the same as the H1, right?
Yes, which there is no size change, which you just said. Yeah, so because I didn't tell it to. Right, thank you, you two. Good job. So that's why it didn't change. So then I could say, holy crap, I'm going to save myself all sorts of trouble. H3, H4, H5, H6. Save changes. Go here and refresh. All of them have taken on the color and the font type without having to do 6 separate chunks of code that run through all those properties and values. So that's grouping, right? That's using selectors to do the same thing to a bunch of them. You can group them together. You could do, and it doesn't have to be just the same type of selector. You could make the paragraph, put that in there and do the same thing to it, simply by putting a comma in there and doing that. So then you decide, after you group them together, hey, you know what? That's cool that I can group and save myself a bunch of trouble in the code, but I actually do want to adjust the size of each of them individually, because until I tell the browser in my CSS, change the size, it's still taking on the default size that the browser has coded in for heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I decide I want my headings to be a little smaller and tighter, I can put that into the CSS file that I've linked to, and it will do that for me and override that. But if I'm going to do a different size for each of these, I'm going to have to do the 6 separate CSS rules. But that does not override what was happening up here. So the color in the font family will still stay there. This will just adjust the size. So you can here take all 6 of those and copy. And again, if you guys don't want to do this with me, you can go right to the bottom here. And actually, this would have been the step. You can go right to the bottom and take this whole chunk and put it in the headings.css file and save it, and you'll be done. But I just want to make sure you understand the changes we're making. So I'm going to take this now, copy it, go in here, put it in there. So enter down, give yourself some space, save the file, go over here and refresh it, and all of them will still have the same color and font type, but they've all been downsized a bit. And you might have noticed I'm not using pixels here, which would just be like 10, 8, 6. You wouldn't have to describe it right after. It would recognize as pixels if you just put 10, 12, 14, 30, whatever. This is another unit of measurement that's I see more often when sites are coded by Europeans. I don't know why, but it's just a unit of measurement they use instead of pixels that is said to be more accurate. You can make changes that are more subtle, and it's because you can actually make the changes within tenths instead of whole numbers. So it's called EMS, E-M, and it's recognized by any browser. It's recognized in most WYSIWYG platforms. You can do pixels or EMS. I tend to stick to pixels because I understand and know pixels just from most Microsoft apps, but if I want to do something really specific, I will switch to EMS if it's just almost small enough, right? And you can start playing around with the size. If you get a WordPress theme and it's set up in EMS, then you just keep it in EMS. You just change it around until you like it, right? So I just wanted to use EMS instead of pixels at least once in the web workshop, and that's why it comes up as a different unit. So now that that's out of the way, we go over here, we see they've all changed. What if now I wanted to make one of them red? Because what's going on here is I've set up a CSS file where they're all gray, 666, that's the color code for gray, and they're all Verdana. But I want to make H3 red. So I can do that because what happens with selectors when you group them is the same type of like hierarchy levels that you get with like the cascade when you have the external sheet, which is the most convenient, but it can be overpowered or overruled by an embedded style, which can be overruled by an inline style. If you group selectors and then you decide you want one selector to be a different color, the selector that's ungrouped, that isn't part of a group, will always be seen or looked to first by the browser before it goes to the group. So in other words, if I go here and I do font-color, actually I should be able to just do color. Color, red, semicolon, and hit save, it will see that, and because that's not part of a grouping for the selector, that will be the one that wins. Okay, it's just like the cascade and how it's like a card game where one trumps the other. So the most specific one will always win, the one that's on the selector that's there as a singular selector. So I've saved the changes, I go here, I refresh, that should turn red. For all of you, that should have happened, and to make that whole, which I just took like over 10 minutes explaining that one little skill, which is understanding grouping. If you guys understand it, then you can go back to the web workshop, just take this, put it into your headings.html file up in the head to make that link to that file, go right to step 1 for setting the specifics, copy that and make that the content of your CSS file, which is headings.css, and you're done with this step in like 2 minutes, right? I just want to make sure you understand what happened. If this didn't work for some of you, I will give you the reasons as usual, but this time, because I want to get through this lecture and leave some time at the end to help you, if it didn't work, we'll fix it at the end. But if it didn't, here would be the reasons why. You did not save headings.css in the step styles folder, which is the folder path that I gave you in the link. You did not put the link into headings.html in the right place. Or you just simply have a typo in the file name for headings.css and it's not working. Okay, it's always something that simple. So that was kind of a little bit of an extra lesson in CSS that you don't always have to separate all your rules for every single HTML tag. You can group them together. Now, classes. Yes?
Sorry, with the heading 3, do you want us to change it red, or is that just an example to show us?
No, change it to red.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, change it to red. Good question. Yeah. It should look, usually once you get to the bottom of the page, and this is like this in Module 4, I do a lot of stuff, and once you get to the bottom, however it looks in the last graphic is how you want it to look, right? So, and then there's a bit of a conclusion here that talks about the rules and how they overrule each other and which one trumps the other, and I've already explained that to you. So if you want to read back through that, it's always available in the web workshop instructions, which are linked to from FOL. So classes. Now this is a little bit tougher to get your head around. So to do this one, we are going to make a brand new HTML file. Okay, so go to classes, go to step 2, take the code, copy it. Okay, go to your text editing program, make a new file, paste it in. You will notice that I've already preemptively given you a link to a new CSS file that we haven't even created yet. We're going to create it. Okay, so this is going into the step styles folder. We'll do that in a second. This file that we're going to use for these classes, we're going to name it classes.html. So this is all per the instructions. So I've taken the code. I'm going to name this classes.html, put it in the steps folder. So the last time I saved a file, it went into step styles. You really got to watch this, right? As I said a few minutes ago, this is where the things start to go off the rails because people put stuff in the wrong place. It's file management. We can handle this. Classes, no capital letters, no spaces, .html, put it into the steps folder. So it goes into the main area of your steps folder, okay? So now we're starting to build up the amount of files we have in here. By the end of this, we'll have 8 files in there. Save it and open it up in your browser. You can close the file too in the text editing program. You won't need it to be open again. So go ahead. We're done with headings. We can close that. Go into steps, open up classes. Okay, so right now what we have here, oops, I'm going to open that back up and clean it up. I ended up by accident, I cut some code in, or I cut some text in with the code. Yeah. I just accidentally copy and pasted some of the text from the website. Refresh. So what we have here are 2 really simple tables. We learned how to do tables in Module 2. You go take a look at the tables. The table code, which if we go to View Source, you'll see table, close table, table row. We got 1 column in the table row. Same thing here. 2 very simple, no border, no spacing. Just like we've been doing with kind of the standard main text element tags or main HTML tags like body, paragraph. We did heading. I think we did some other stuff last week, but you can also adjust the way your table is going to appear with your CSS. So this is going to be done in the file we're about to make called classes.css, which I already had linked to this file in there. So right now it looks like this, okay? As soon as we create the file classes.css with a bunch of CSS to tell the browser how we want our tables to look, it's going to look different. So start a blank file, go to the instructions, and take everything in step 4 and put it in there. So this is a very, very simple one. So this is even easier than the first one. You just take this chunk, save it as a file, take this chunk, save it as a file, put them in the right places, and everything should work. What I don't want you doing is just flying past this part of Module 4 without understanding what happened. So take this stuff, put it here, file, save as. We're saving another CSS file, which means what? It's going to go into step styles. Because all our HTML files have been going out in the main area of the steps folder. All the CSS goes into step styles, and it's called classes.css. Why would I give you guys HTML files and CSS files with the same exact name? Well, I probably did that on purpose just so you're paying attention to your file management. And then later in Module 4, I'm going to not have them have the same name just so you're paying attention, because that's every time I grade these for you guys, and I'm just annihilating people on their marks. It's always for typos. That's the main reason. People have rushed and thrown it together in the last minute. They've never bothered to look to see if the stuff was even working, and it's typos. So make sure this is right. No capital letters, no spaces. Save it. Now that that file's there, because in the code I was already linked to it, now that it exists, as soon as I refresh, I see 2 different versions of a table that look pretty darn close to the same in the code. Okay? table here, table here. This one has something there that's extra. And this is what I want to talk about. So this is called a class. So as soon as you link to a CSS file that has instructions in it to format anytime a table tag is used, to format it a certain way, as long as you have this link up in the head of that HTML document, every time you use table, it's going to come up the way you told table to look, which is like this. This is my border right, this is my border left. And now you're starting to see actually a lot more CSS instruction, like a lot more properties than you knew were even available. And I've never gone and memorized these. I kind of know that you could do align right, align left, border right, border left, stuff like that. But if I ever forget which codes are actually out there, I can just go back and Google them, find them at W3 schools. They're always there. So I don't want you guys to get hung up on the fact that I'm giving you a pile of codes. You never have to memorize this stuff. If you want to know what's going on, just look at the name of the code, and you're probably going to be able to figure out what it's doing based on that. Because when you get a WordPress theme, it's going to have all this stuff in there for you. But then the other table looked different, right? Like it looked totally different. Now, if you've gone ahead and worked on this, you might already know why, but the reason for this is because in addition to setting up your CSS coding to say every time a table tag comes up, make it look like this, you can also say, hey, I want tables to look a little bit different on some pages. And then one of my students in the last section, they actually said, well, wait, all you got to do for that is do an embedded style. Just embed in the head underneath the link. Okay, so if I go back here, they right away said to me, which indicated to me this student was really following along, so I was impressed with that. Why don't you just go into the code and write underneath there, instead of saying, take the way the table looks here, I want the table in this page to all look like that. And there's two reasons why that isn't always the best way to do it. Number one is because what if you don't want every table on that page to look like that, right? What if you do want to revert back to the table from the CSS file? And the second reason is, what if you had like 1,000 pages in your site? You don't want to have to go through and start slamming that code in there every time you need it. You want to have this little special format that you can just pull up whenever you want. And this is why I mentioned at the beginning of this module, even though I taught you guys that there's the whole hierarchy and how this works, that there are 3 ways to do CSS, and one trumps the other in the cascade here, you can actually build it all into a single CSS file and just pull up classes when you need them. So if you want something to look different than the standard way you've set it up to look in your CSS, you can use what we did here, which is a class. So in the CSS file, you'll see it looks different. Every basic HTML tag, but the standard, all the standard HTML block level elements that we've been talking about in the web workshop, body, table, heading 1 through 6, paragraph, okay? These are all called up in CSS simply by typing them out. You don't have to do anything special. You have to type them out the way they are spelled with no capital letters, and CSS will know that's what to do every time. But then if you want a table to look a little bit different, you then can create what's called a class. So a class starts with a period. Okay, as soon as you put a period on a line of your CSS file, anything that follows that period will be considered the name of a custom class you've made. We've called this one alt table, but we could call it anything we want. The standard HTML tags have to be named what they are named and interpreted as by the browsers. The W3 set all this up. They have to be named that way. Classes can be named anything you want. This could be called crazy table, or whatever you want it to be. It doesn't even have to have table in the name. It could just be called alternative format. Okay, and you would maybe remember that that's for table. But because you can name them anything you want, you should name them something that somewhat describes what you're doing. So this is considered to be a class, as it's followed, as the name is followed, comes right after the period. And then all of these properties and values are a little bit different than this. And these will override whatever is here if a new property and value comes up. So now there's more here. So border right, border top, border left. So margin here is 0. And in the class, I didn't tell it to do another margin. So that means for margin, it will automatically revert back to, in the code, okay, this class does not specify a margin, so then it'll go back to this the previous tag and say, okay, so the margin is 0 for table. So it's still doing this hierarchy thing with the rules where one beats the other. And the class will beat out the standard CSS rule for table. And all you have to do to get it to work is add the attribute and then property class. Okay, sorry, the attribute class and property alt table. So class equals alt table. You don't need the period in there. Even though the period's in there in the CSS file, it does not need to be in there in the HTML. The period is just to tell the CSS file this is a class. In HTML, just like when you have any other attribute, after you put an equal sign in, what you put in there is just going to be in quotes. So if I were to open up that file, okay, which is classes.css in my text edit program, and pull that out of there. So I'm going to pull out class, okay, and save the file. What it's going to do is it's going to revert right back to the standard way I want my table to appear in the CSS file. This is the CSS file. This is how I told it table should look. So you can have these classes sitting in a CSS file and never use them. And then when you need them, all you have to do is go into the code, and in WordPress, of course, is going to be completely different. But when you need them, all you have to do is go into the code, add class equals, and then put the name of the class. Now, in WordPress, once we start using it, you're going to see that they're going to have a drop-down menu in there. Whenever you have something associated with the standard tag, they'll allow you to pick from any of the classes you have available to apply to that. So alt table is the class. As soon as I put that back in there and hit refresh, oh, and I might want to save the file too. That'd probably help. So save, and then refresh. It's back to the alternative format. Okay, that's how a class works. So don't do this with me, but just to give you another example, if I just jump over to my personal portfolio really quickly here, let's say I'm over here and I'm working on my index. My index looks like this right now, and down at the bottom here, I put this little thing. I said, hey, don't forget to like me on Facebook. I got a bit of a typo in there too. So I'm going to open that up, my text editing program. That's a heading too, okay? Hey, don't forget to like me on Facebook. So it looks like this right now, just how it looked. Okay? Oops, sorry, I just deleted something I didn't mean to delete. Ignore what I'm doing here because you guys haven't gotten this far in the module yet. This is some stuff I needed to clean up. Okay. So it's just a little thing I added at the bottom here. Looks like this. Now if I wanted to manipulate this with a class, that would be pretty easy to do. You can apply classes to all sorts of elements. You can apply them to tables. You can apply them just to text. You can apply them to whatever you want. So if I wanted to go further with this and go into the actual CSS file that we have for this, which we made last week, right? So if you finish Module 3, you should have a CSS file for your personal portfolio site. If you want to start a class, go down here, type a period. I can call this class whatever the heck I want. Crazy nuts, big fat text. Okay? Crazy, that's too many T's in a row. Crazy nuts, massive text. There. Start a seagull, CSS bracket. I'm using Notepad++, so it immediately closed the seagull for me, which is very nice and friendly. And then start putting in property value, property value, property value. Now I'm intending this to just apply to text, but I can still have a background on a text. right? I can still change the font. Let's do font size first. Let's make it big. 36. Okay, that's pretty big. Colon, semicolon, go to the next one. Okay? Background, not background color, background position, just plain old background. Colon. Let's do black background. We'll make it look like a banner. So that black and white, as I told you, are the only two color codes I remember. White is triple F, black is 000, semicolon. Let's do font family as well. So font family. Let's make this different than the Arial. So let's make it Tahoma actually. Tahoma. Save. Your Seagull's already closed. I can decide to use this on some text by saving the name of the class, going in here, and let's put it on H2. Okay? Class equals Crazy Nuts Massive Text. Okay? Save your file. And also save the CSS file that you put it into. So I'm applying the knowledge that we learned over in steps. That's what that looks like. Well, you know what? That'd look way better if the color was white for the text. Okay, so cool. You don't have to change anything in your HTML. Go to the class and go to color and change it to white. Are you guys with me here? I know it's freaking late, okay? Okay. If you're not, please ask me for help when I'm done with this, because I will come and do this on your computer and show you. Here, and I'm going to do one more thing that might make it even easier to understand. So in my CSS file, in my personal portfolio, I'm testing this out now. I went down to the bottom, I put a period, I came up with some silly name for this class, and then I started Seagull, I closed Seagull, and I did property value. The same way you do if you're doing a standard HTML tag. You have the two Seagull brackets, and then you do property value, property value. Got to remember to put your semicolon and your colon in there to indicate when you're doing the values for each one, but that's what I've done here. So I just went and added color white in there and saved the CSS file. I don't have to do anything to the index file. When I go and refresh from the CSS file, the font has turned white. What if I wanted that to be in the middle? Same thing, go in here, align, it's text align. Text align. How do I know these codes? I know the codes because I've done it a few times. If I didn't know the codes, I just Google it and get the code. But it really doesn't matter in the end in this course, because you're being trained as marketing professionals to crank out high quality websites efficiently. So you're not going to be coding. You're learning the code because in WordPress, you're going to get a big, huge CSS file, and you're going to see things like this. And when you see them, you'll actually know how to change them and fix them up and alter the way the CSS is looking. You're never going to actually have to code it from scratch except for the web workshop. Text align, center, semicolon, save it. Go and refresh now. We've got it looking like this. Okay, now here, you said you were confused in the back there. Watch what I do to the code now, and it won't actually change how this looks at all. If I go into the index code, which I got to open again, so I'm on mypp index. This is pulling up the class Crazy Nuts Massive Text, right? So if I took this and I got rid of it, as soon as you get rid of it, it goes back to the way heading 2 looks in your CSS. Here's another way to look at it. This class, which I have in there on heading 2, is a class that I've set up to mainly apply to text. So any HTML block level element that is specifically associated with text will accept most of the formatting I put in there. So look, guys, watch. That's doing this right now with the code H2. Okay, if I put it back in there, it's, oops, I gotta save again. So I put it back in, I save my changes, and it should be back on now. There it is. If I change this HTML tag to paragraph, and then close paragraph over here, what do you think's gonna happen? Instead of H2, I've applied the class, right? So look at this here. I've applied the class, but instead of H2 to take the class, I'm putting the class in the paragraph. Is this going to look any different? This right here. No. Good answer. No. Oh, it does. Actually, no, I take that back. It looks a little bit different because the font type and the bolding and stuff for paragraph is slightly different than H2, and I didn't specify in the class that I wanted to change that. What if I put it in body? In the HTML. What if I go into the HTML for index where I start body up here, and you could see I did this in the last section. I was doing a different name, and I put the same class on the entire body. Well, it's going to change all sorts of stuff. It's going to make the entire background black of the entire page because in the CSS I say background black. So if you apply it to an element that isn't a line level element, like body is the whole damn thing, now when I go and refresh, the entire page is black. So the class, you can stick it on anything, right? But you obviously, when you make a class, you're specifically making it maybe for a table, maybe for just the way you want a font to look. So you wouldn't necessarily do that. Okay, and then if you don't like the way a class looks and you've got it recurring too many times in your HTML, as soon as you go into the CSS and remove the class from the CSS file and save it, as I explained in the step side, if it sees a class in the code and it can't find the class in the CSS file, it automatically reverts back to the standard CSS for those tags. Did that help? Do you guys sort of see what that class is doing? You're not going to have to make your own classes. You'll get WordPress themes, which are pre-designed site templates, and they'll have a bunch of classes already made for you. And you can just kind of stick them on and apply them to different elements in your pages to see if you like them or not. So that's what a class does. And the class then is a better way of overriding the CSS than embedding it because you can use it anywhere in your site. And it's more simply used because it's just this little part put into the HTML tag instead of having to embed the whole code up in the head. Any questions? Okay, so we're good there. Let's move on. Okay? Now, you guys are probably getting a little bit frustrated with me at that point because you're probably looking at that like, holy cow, Mike, like that could have taken us like 30 seconds, literally. We make 2 files, we see it work, we move to the next step. But you would have never known really what the class was actually doing. You need to understand this. I will never drag you through stuff like this with this much detail once we get into WordPress. WordPress, you kind of go from one thing to the other, and it's better. But you're still at the basics here. Now, this was one of the biggest things that sort of started to better organize the layout of a website when it came out, because there's other ways to do this. You can set up a site and set it up so that everything isn't always slammed to the sides when you load the site up by using a table and then centering the table in the middle of the body. But by using divs, you can control the size and area of these different boxes and spaces in the CSS file. So that's way better than a table because then you can just change it once in the CSS file and it changes on every page where you use what's called a div tag. Div, I believe, and there's a couple sites that say this is true, a couple that say it's not. It's short for division as far as I know. And that makes sense because what it does is it breaks up your site into specific sections, the pages where you use these divs. So this is what we referred to as the box model when we first started learning this stuff, right? So you can have your main div, which could be like your wrapper or main content or something. You can actually name divs whatever you want, the same way you can name classes. Unless you're dealing with standard HTML block level elements that have a name, you can name things whatever you want. Which often comes in handy for people that don't speak English as a first language, but they've learned HTML code. Then they can use, if the keyboard is compatible, they can use names in their own language that make sense to them if they're going to be the only ones using their website. Most of the stuff, you should always go with English if you're questioning it. So as soon as you start one, you have to close it at some point. And if you want to box something within that, you start and close that within the box that you're already inside of. So this kind of explains that. In HTML, to get the divs to come up, obviously you can't just put them into the CSS file. Then you're going to have to call them up the same way you call up classes. But it is very simple coding. the HTML code for pulling up a div is div ID equals, and then you name the div. To close it, /div, as usual in chevrons. So when we came out with this, or when whoever came up with it, this was a major, major time saver. The whole thing with the web is to save time and create efficiencies. So when websites started to get really bulky and complicated, they had to come up with a way to save time and create efficiencies. So that's why we use these div IDs and these selectors to organize our sites. So we're going to do an example of this with like 4 really common areas on a page, okay? And we're going to give them names that actually make sense in the way they describe the area we're in. Header, sidebar, content, and footer. Okay, so if you want to take a second to read this, if you're watching the video, you can. I'm going to keep explaining it, so we're just going to keep going for the sake of my class here. Now, one student already asked me about this. She said, can I use frames in my personal portfolio? So I don't even know how she knew what frames were or why they'd still be coming up at this point. But frames are a way to organize a site the same way you can organize them with divs. But frames are actually like a bunch of little separate pages within a page. So what the problem with frames is search engines, most of them, and this is what I learned to be the major problem with a frame-based site, when search engines started really getting good at looking at the content in sites, most search engines, they'll go to like the first frame or the top level frames only and look for content. So if you've got all your juicy stuff down in this lower frame, the search engine won't see it. It'll just see the main frames that page starts with. And frames in general are just a pain in the butt. You don't want to use them. Students are still saying, well, why can't we make the page in tables? Because then you have to do it for every page. You can set up your divs and set up their widths and their sizing and all that stuff in one file. And all you have to do then to get them to come up in the HTML is call up the div by going div ID equals. So it's just the best way to do it. It's faster, it's more efficient than doing anything with frames or tables. And WordPress, I mean, everything that's set up in a WordPress site, that actually operates on a different type of code called PHP, which we'll talk about when we start using WordPress. But they still use divs on a large scale to keep things sort of set up in certain areas of pages. When it goes responsive, it brings up different divs that are different sizes. Okay? So I'm going to go through the better part of this. What I'm going to tell you guys to do at home and in my classroom here, if you want to avoid screwing around with this particular set of steps for more than an hour, do what I'm about to do to get this set up. Go right to step 16, all the way. Go right to step 16, copy all of the code in step 16, and save that as a new file called containers.html. I'm going to do that over again, okay? We are on the containers part, containers, just containers, okay, in module 4. I'm going to demonstrate and explain to you how this kind of changes as we go through and the changes that are made to the divs and why they're working. But I want you guys to get your marks, not to mess this up. Go right to step 16 on this containers page. Copy that code, save it as containers.html. It's an HTML file. We're still in steps, so we are not going to save it in step styles. We're not going to be in mypp, which is where I am now because I was playing around with stuff over there. We're going to go into steps, and in the main area of the steps folder, we're saving containers.html. Are you guys with me? Good. Now, I'm going to leave that file open. You can just close it because you're not going to have to do anything else to that file. Go down to the very, very bottom and take everything in the blue box from step 21 and save that as your CSS file, which for this particular set of steps is not going to be called containers.css. Just for the sake of seeing if you guys are watching the file names, we're going to call this one layout.css. Copy all the code from step 21. So we're still on the same page, containers. We've made an HTML file out of step 16 called containers.html. We're going to make a CSS file out of step 21. We're going to copy everything, nothing more, nothing less, and we're going to call it layout.css. So file new, Paste it in there. For those of you, because there's a bunch of people missing from class today. For those of you that are here, I'm kind of throwing you a bone here. This is saving you a ton of time, okay? You're not cheating. We're still going to go through and learn it. We're just...
In step styles. Right?
Yeah, yes, perfect. In step style. File save as layout.css. Anytime you're doing a .css, you put it in the folder you've set up for all of your script or CSS files, which is called step styles. Layout.css in there. If you can handle doing those two things, taking step 16, saving it in the right folder as containers.css, .html, and then step 21 in the right folder called layout.css. When you open up containers from your steps site, it should look like this. Okay? That's how it should look. I want everybody to get that, and then I'm going to go through and show you how this happened. Okay? So I'm just going to assume that you guys have gotten pretty good at cutting and pasting. You at least were able to do that, because all I'm just fast tracking you right to the 2 steps where you need to get the complete files. Now here's what's happening here. A div is similar to a class. You can name it anything you want, and you can give it background colors. You can set the font type in a div. You can do all sorts of stuff inside a div. But it will not come up unless you name the div ID and then close the div again afterwards. And then whatever you put inside that div will be set up in a format and in a space that you've identified or organized, whatever you want to say, in the properties and values for that div. So the way this started was I had you guys, or I was going to have you guys, I'm not making you do this, you're just watching me now. You were going to set up this file. You are then going to go back into it and add the link for the CSS, and then you're going to start building the CSS. So I'm going to backtrack mine slightly, and I'm going to take the way containers is set up now out of there. You're not doing this. You just stick with step 16 and step 21, and now just watch me. I think for this it might actually be a bit better if you just watch. So I'm going to copy this, put it in there, go before my head closes, put the link to the CSS file, because why wouldn't I keep making you do that? It's good practice. And of course I give you the link, which is directly to the file that you should have made called layout.css. Okay, I put that in there. And now I've got this file. And in the layout.css file, I start you with just some really basic stuff, okay? I start you with a little bit of elements on the body. Let's have a 0 margin and no padding. And then I name 4 divs, and I define the background color and the font color. Now, classes started with what? HTML tags, you just type them in, body, whatever. You don't have to put anything in front of them in the CSS file. What do we have to start a class with so the CSS file knows it's a class? A period. Excellent. You guys are listening. So divs all start with a hashtag, number sign, pound, whatever you want to call it. That's how divs start. So within a CSS file, you're going to see 3 different types of instructions now, 3 different types of CSS, I guess, elements. You're going to see standard HTML block level elements. You're going to see classes that could be applied to any element, and then you're going to see divs that will be applied when they're called up in the HTML. Here we have 4 divs. So the first step was to just build the divs, make a color, make a font color. So as soon as I do that, and you'll see in my HTML, I've actually pulled them up 4 in a row. Div ID equals banner, close. Div ID equals side nav, close. Here's how it'll look. Okay, and before here. Before I add the CSS, it looks like this. Containers, get in there. Okay, just 4 lines of text with nothing happening, right? I haven't put any format on it. As soon as I put the CSS in there, because I just pulled the link out. As soon as I apply the CSS, okay, the divs are already pulled up. I have all the div tags in there, which shows you again, if the HTML, if it can't find that stuff, it's not going to show you errors. Okay, it's just going to revert to It's just going to keep going back to the base level formatting. Once I put the CSS in there and save, looks like this. Where is that coming from? It's coming from me calling up the div. So don't say I didn't show you this, because in your personal portfolio, everybody sits there for like 20 minutes going, why isn't it coming up? I put it in my CSS file. Because then you have to go into the HTML and say div ID banner, start here, close here, and then put some stuff in the banner. It's not going to be there otherwise. So because I've called these up, and because I'm now connected to a CSS file that says, let's make a background color and a font color, it didn't really change the layout of it much. It just made these colors and font colors across. So then I realized, oh, cool. Okay, well, I could start boxing this up and like organizing this and spacing this all out to have my site sit right in the middle of the screen where it should be instead of all slammed to the sides. So the reason I put this here is because I want you to see what we're trying to achieve. That actually should be there. Good, I don't have to edit my site. So this is here to show you what we're trying to achieve. So now we're going to start doing it. Here's what we did here. Side nav, float left, okay, 180 pixels wide. So what I did was I shrunk the size of the side nav area, which then gave the screen enough space to bring up the next content area that was just sitting there. And the way I have it in the HTML now, side nav content, I don't specify any widths yet, but as soon as I put that in the CSS, this one will move up to that line. Doesn't matter how they're laid out here. They just come one after another. So because I made that only 180 pixels wide and said float left, it'll leave the rest of that space on the right for anything else that doesn't have a float set to it to be right next to it. Okay? So that's why that happened. Then I say, okay, let's try and get this more like this. So let's try and start increasing the size. Okay? So I add a heading in there, add some content, right? And it starts to look like this. So I tell you to type this in, but I don't actually give you a cut and paste like I usually do. So that's where these instructions get a little hairy. That's why I want to make sure I helped you guys fast track. So this was done without even changing the CSS. I just added some stuff into the HTML, right? Then I go in here and I say, you know what? I want the side nav to sit next to that. Let's move the content area 200 pixels over. So you go margin left, which means from the left. We're not going to do anything until 200 pixels. Then I say, hey, this whole thing is kind of like not really working for me because I want to just get one main box where I put everything inside of. So then I create the wrap, and then I change my HTML and put the wrap around the divs. And then I keep adjusting things. I add some padding and some padding. And then I make the width of the main wrap a specific amount of pixels so it sits there and it's only 800 pixels. And then ultimately, I should get something that looks like this, and that's why I jump you right to step 21. So now, if I go back to my HTML, and I put what I should have in there from step 16, which is how I started you guys, which is when I added the wrap in. Step 16, wrap. Okay, right there, copy. That goes in there, and I save my changes. And then I go to layout.css, which should ultimately have all those changes and sizing changes in there. And I put that in for layout.css right here and save my changes. This is what I would end up with in the end. But I have very few students manage to get through every single one of those steps without messing a character up or doing something wrong, which is why I'm helping you guys to just get it done. And then I went back through it and showed you how it works. And you might also notice that in here I've preemptively added in your background images, which once we put the image files in the images folder, you'll see this change a little bit, but that's the next step we're going on to. So just to save you the trouble of having to deal with that and change anything in the layout.css file, I've added that in there too. So bottom line, as long as you go to step 21 and copy that for layout.css, you will never have to change anything in layout.css again. That's all you have to do. So now we're going to move on to background images. Now for you guys, that you should have this. And we're going to come back to this in a minute, but you should have this. All you had to do is copy step 16 and step 21 and put the files in the right place. So I'm going to leave that. And we are one more time going to create a new file and a new CSS file. Before we do that, we're going to grab this image and put it in the images folder. So at the top here, I'm on background images part 1. Everybody work with me here. Right click, save image as, go into steps, make sure you're in steps, and go to images. Don't change the name, don't add, don't type in an extension in there. Computers don't need that anymore. It's already a GIF image. Just save it. And it should save as bg.gif because I'm about to give you a file path that will lead to that file. Okay, are we all good? There's a lot of chitter chatter out there. You guys okay? Yeah, well don't save it. Don't even think about the file name. Just go save image as and put it in images. So leave the file name as is, right? Leave it, I've already named it BG for you, and it's already a GIF. And that's not, you can't change a file type anyway when you're saving it. You just allow the extension to come through with it, and you leave the file name the same. Now, go and make an HTML file. And these instructions are a bit screwy. I start you on a CSS document, say save it as background.css. Then I have you start the HTML file. I'm just deliberately doing this for you guys to watch your file management. So just jump to step 6 and do the HTML file first. Okay, step 6, file new, HTML. Okay, go into the head, enter a couple spaces for yourself, and add the link to the CSS file you're about to create, which is step 8. And then save it as background.html. You see what I'm doing to you guys deliberately. I like have you make it, and then I have you save it, and then I have you add the text in, and then save it again. I'm trying to save you a few steps here. So save as, out of step styles. So now, finally, we have our total of 8 files in steps. So we have the full amount of files we're going to have in steps when we're done. Okay, background.html is the final file. And then once it's set up and saved, you can go in there and pull it up in your browser. So before you put any CSS together, it's just going to look like this. Okay, what we're going to do here is learn how to apply background images using pre-designed image files, like using a JPEG, GIF, or PNG. We're going to pull that up and put it into the background from the images folder. So to do that, we are going to create another CSS file, and this will be our final CSS file in steps, and we're going to name that background.css. So these two files have the same name. So I start you off at the top here. I say put the comment in, save it as background.css, put the CSS all together bit by bit by bit. Once again, I'm going to fast track you right to the bottom because I don't, you know, for people that are sitting at home and they want to go through the steps, that's great, and it's a great learning experience, but I'm going to teach it to you guys in the classroom here and in this video, so I want you to just go to step 19, copy it, make a brand new file, a blank one, our final CSS file in steps. We're going to save as in step styles background.css. So I'm kind of going a little faster now because we've done this like 3 or 4 times now in this particular module already. Just follow the instructions. What I'm giving you are my abridged instructions, which run you right through them into step 19. Save it as background.css, close it, refresh your background.html, and it should look like this now. Okay?
So for
one thing we missed, hang on, you're going to ask me a question in a second. One thing we missed in the midst of that was the second image we want to put on the bottom of that red bar, which was in step 17. So your final thing to do in background images part 1 is then go to step 17, save image as, just like the blue thing, just save it. Don't mess with it, don't play with it, just save it. Okay, and then it'll look like that. Now a couple quick disclaimers, because now you're done. Now I'm going to go back and teach you what just happened here, but you're done. You should be able to turn this in now that way. When you go to the bottom, you'll notice that the blue box is somewhere kind of around where the H1 is. This is because the monitor that I was using when I took this screenshot, that's where the resolution was. If I scroll back out to about there and reduce the zoom, you'll see that I can get the blue box to be sort of close to that. It doesn't matter where it is, okay? That's because of the way we've set up that background. And you also might find that some of you, depending on the browser you are using, have this white bar across the top. Some of you may not. Do not worry about it. As long as you see these two background images coming up, we are now going to go back and figure out how we got there. And I give you screenshots along the way to show you. So we saved this HTML document, linked it up to this CSS file, and then started building the CSS file. So the first thing we did is we learned how to create a background from an image. So in the body, in the CSS, which is the only tag we started with, we add in this, background-image. So that's the CSS code for using an image in your background instead of a color. What's background color? Do you remember? It's background-color. So some of these are pretty obvious. Now this is where it gets a little funky. And I told you in Module 2, that, or maybe it was 3, you would start to see, once again, newer brackets. And these are the ones that Americans call parentheses. In Canada, we somehow have gotten stuck in this thing of calling them brackets, I think because we're more based on the UK English, where they do call them brackets. But those are parentheses in terms of web use. And inside of them is where you put a file path, not in quotes. So if you guys can simmer down for a second here, this is an important thing to understand because you might want to get, you know, some bonus marks in your personal portfolio and add your own background images in, and you're going to want to make sure you understand how to draw the file path. Does anybody know what the heck this is for? Right there. What is that? Anybody know what that is? Why is that there? I put the background image here. Here's my files. Here are my files. I put the background image in here in images. Okay. Here's my CSS file, background.css. Okay. Let me show you that one more time. Here's my images folder. I have to go out and then go in here. Here's my background.css file. What is that for? Yes? Yes, kind of. From the guy who was talking, that's cool because you actually got the right answer. Okay? This means go back out, and you were right, to the main folder. So what this is bound, if you were 3 folders deep and you had to get back out to the main folder, you could do period, period, forward slash, period, period, forward slash, period, period, forward slash. So the period, period, forward slash is your text to get you out of the folder that you're in. So the reason you need that is because you are creating this code in your CSS file, which happens to be in step styles. And to get to the images folder in steps, you have to go back out to the main area of the steps folder and then into images. So what this is doing is going back out, and then this is going into images. If you don't have that there, it won't be able to find the images folder because there is no images folder at the level where you are when you're in step styles. You can't see it. And Macs are very deceiving because they always show you your folder structure all in one place, but it can't see it, okay? You need to use the bounce out code, and I gave it to you with the bounce out code. So if we were to have gone through each of these steps, which I don't need to do in the video, that's more for the people that are working through it at home. You go through, you create the CSS file with just this, and if you're just linking to a background image, it doesn't matter if it's like a big square, a little square, it's 50 by 50 pixels, it's 5,000 by 5,000. If you don't specify where you want it to be or whether or not you want it to repeat, it'll fill up the entire page. If you then specify, sure, background-repeat, I'll make it repeat, and that's the code for repeating, it'll still fill up the entire page. Now the reason I showed you that is because remember graph paper from elementary school? Remember X across the top, Y is up and down, okay? Vertical versus horizontal. So repeat-X as your repeat code will actually just run it across the top. Repeat-Y will run it across the side. Then, of course, you probably already know where this is going. Okay? Repeat-Y, background-position right will run it up and down, repeat-Y, but stick it to the right side of the screen. This will do that without repeating because this is no repeat. Okay, so we'll just put it. This is how you get these graphics to be where you want them to be on pages. You probably always wonder, like, how do these, you can't just paste it in there like a Word document, it just shows up. It's going to be flying all over the place with the resolution if you don't tell it where to go. So that's what all this is about, top right. And then you see here we can go to percentages. So this means no matter how big or small the screen is, you're going to go 25%, 25% down and 75% across. This is actually 50-50 here. This is precisely in the middle. 25-75 is the code I ask you to put in, even though I don't show you that picture. Then I have you put the last image in, and then ultimately when you add all the stuff in there, you should have something that looks like that. Okay? So once again, I'm helping you guys kind of just fly your way through this, but I want to make sure you understand how this stuff is working. And these instructions linked from FOL will never go anywhere. So you can always go back to them in the middle of a quiz and check them out. Then I take you through another little chunk of background image type of stuff. And I explain, hey, I just say, let's add some of this stuff to your containers page. And previous to my helping people cheat and go right to step 21 on the containers page, you actually had to go through and add the code here. But what I did was I already gave you the background codes in the code that you took from step 21 here. Okay, they were already in there, see? And one of these, which is XHTML, you already saved in the images folder on background images part 1. So all you have to do on this page for part 2 is right click, save image as, put this in the folder with the rest of the images, and then when you go back and reload your containers page now, in the wrong site, it should look like this. It should have this nice little shadow there and this nice little shadow here without doing anything, because I gave you guys the right codes. If you've gone in there and messed it up, we will have time now where I can fix it. If you're in my online course, I'll be available for chat before it's due. So, okay. Finally, the very end. And this is totally optional. You don't have to do it. Technically, you can still earn 100% on this project, even if you don't do this. It's up to you. At the very end, I show you another picture. And then I say, hey, some of you might have noticed I've added this in here. I've added some stuff in here. If you can get that, I'm not going to help you with this. If you can just get this to look like this, and your links don't have to be not underlined, by the way. That would be text dash decoration none if you wanted no underlining. If they're underlined, that's fine too. What I really want you to do is to make this navigation menu, because when I grade your web workshop, if you have the nav menu, it saves me about 1.5 minutes when I'm in your steps folder. Okay, so let's have questions now, because you might have questions specifically about this. But
Do you grade all the web workshop or just the mypp?
I grade steps. Okay, yeah. Which is the one you have the answers to, so it should be the easy one.
So you don't grade mypp?
No, I grade both. I grade the entire thing.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a really good question to ask right about now, because here's the thing I want you guys to know. A lot of you throughout this class have been kind of chit-chatting with each other, helping each other, and I know you're like doing the same thing I'm doing, you're helping. Don't share files, okay? Help each other out, that's fine, that's great, but don't share files, because if some of you have the same exact like ridiculous mistakes in steps and nobody else has them but like 3 of you do, I'm going to know that you shared the files. I also have this program that scans for identical file registry information in the files, which I can use if I need to. I don't scan everybody's because I don't want to assume that you're all cheating. Very few of you ever would do that, but I make this easy enough. You are allowed to help each other out if you get stuck. Just make your own files, okay? Do not share files. Steps is a really easy way for me to see if you've cheated, because if somebody goes, oh man, can I just borrow your assignment? I'll hook you up on something else in some other class, and they give it to you, but they had like 3 really like blatant bad mistakes, and then you were the only other guy that had those exact 3 same mistakes. Like, I mean, it doesn't take much to figure out what went on there. And my personal portfolio, you really can't cheat because everybody has to customize it and it should look different for everybody. But technically for steps, if you all do it right, all of your steps should look identical. And I will be marking them. So if you can go in at the end and try and put this nav menu in there for me, that'd be great. I can kind of start you on it. like the reason we set up these divs is so we can start putting content in them. So if you go into the containers page, which is the page you're supposed to do this on, see where it says this is a side nav area? Okay. Do a couple line breaks. It looks like there's at least 2 lines in there, right? So do a couple line breaks, and then put the first link that I ask you to have. But you'd actually put the hyperlink. So you'd go back to module 2, you'd get the code, you'd put a hyperlink here to index. Okay, this would just be the link text. And you would also try and align center, okay, which is just an attribute and a value. You could put that into the HTML code. And as you start adding those and doing more and more, you can just build your menu up. And you should eventually get to the point where you have everything. And you might have to look up a couple codes, but that's the point, right? I want you guys to kind of try and start applying this. See? So I've started building it. I'd rather see that in the center of the div, right? So if you align center in the HTML code, it'll just align it in the div. So yeah, I'm not going to get into that much more than that because I do want that to actually be extra credit. With the skills you've picked up through the entire Steps website that you've built, you can easily put this junk in the main content section and put this stuff in here. You can. Okay? Whether or not you want to bother to do that for 2 extra points, totally up to you. Now, for the My Personal Portfolio part, I will let you guys know right now because I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I'm going to take maybe 4 or 5 minutes and show you how to start this. I actually do have a completely separate video just for My Personal Portfolio, okay? It's 25 minutes long. It goes through the whole thing for mypp and shows you how to apply all the kind of CSS stuff you did in Module 4 and bring it over to My Personal Portfolio. So the one thing I want you to know is just because you're using the divs now doesn't mean you're erasing everything else you did, okay? You can still leave the main background color on your page. You can still do things, still leave everything you did. But you're going to put the divs in and move all your content into the divs on all 4 pages. You're not going to skip the contact page because that one had a table. I already told you that tables are not acceptable ways to break up pages, okay? Tables are still used quite often inside of a div to just space out some information. You don't always need to make a new div just to space some information out. So here's how to start this, okay? This is the easiest way. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. I'm going to do it the easiest way. Okay, close all your files up and go into mypp. And if you finish Module 3, you should have 1 CSS file in here. Unlike the step side where I had you create 4 or 5 different CSS files. I think it was just 4. 5, okay? Everything you do for My Personal Portfolio should go into this one file called mypp.css. And at the end of Module 3, you should have linked that one file in the head of each of these documents to all those HTML files. Okay, so that means you're getting the background color and all the stuff I have here on every one of your 4 files. So it's already linked. So now what you're going to do is add a bunch of stuff to that file that you can now use in each of those 4 pages. So obviously, step number 1, you have to have this file linked up to all those files, and that's why I have another video in my playlist that has Web Workshop Modules 2 and 3 overview to make sure when you get to all this stuff in Module 4, you have the things you need done in Modules 2 and 3 to make it work. A lot of people try and jump in at the end and just do a little bit, but you have to have really done this from the beginning. So open up that file, the mypp.css, in your text editing program. If you have Dreamweaver on your computer, by the way, and you start opening these CSS files, it's going to start opening it up automatically in Dreamweaver. Sorry about that. So if you've done the stuff I asked you to do last week, which is format H2, not H1. I think we did H1 in steps. You could still have left H1, but do some stuff to the body. You don't have to take any of that out of there. Just enter down after that seagull after P. Don't get rid of any of these brackets. Enter down and go back to the Web Workshop instructions. Okay, okay, back to the Web Workshop instructions, right here, and go back to containers and go back to that famous step 21. Without taking the body tag, because you don't need that. You already have a bunch of stuff applied to your body. Just Leave that out of there.
Or the hashtag is.
Start with a hashtag. Get all the divs. Take just the divs. And you know divs start with hashtags. Just take the divs, copy them, and stick them underneath your paragraph tag or whatever the last tag is in there. And then if you really want to be thorough, because you don't really need them, you still have the links to the background images in there. You can go and delete those. But if you think you might add your own background images, then leave the codes in there so you can just reuse the code and change the file paths. I'm not going to take points off either way. Just get the divs and stick them into your CSS. Save the CSS file. Okay, now, just doing that is not going to change anything in this file. Okay, remember I didn't bring the body in, so all the other stuff I had in there already should still be there. Why? What do I still need to do? What? No, it's linked. It's linked here. All the CSS is still there. What do I need to do to make use of all those divs?
You gotta go back.
No, I got to go into the HTML, and yeah, I got to call them up. I got to do div ID equals div ID equals. I got to bring. Yeah, that's what you meant, right? Yes. Okay, you were right. So I got to bring the divs into the HTML because unlike standard HTML tags, where I don't have to bring, like the body appears in HTML and it automatically brings all my CSS formatting for the body in. If I'm doing a class or a div, I have to call it up. So the div, so then for the next part, go back to the instructions again and go to my famous step 16. And in step 16, do not take the entire HTML file, please. Pay attention, okay? Just take the div stuff. So just take where the divs are brought into the HTML. So, which in this case in step 16 is everything that's inside the body, but not the body tags. Take that, copy it, okay? And open up index in steps. Just try this once and make sure it works in index, in your code, in code view. And go below all of the content you've put in, but before your body closes, and put those div calls in there. Put those div IDs in there, okay? From step 16. Save the file. This, I know at this point you're like, holy cow, Mike, is there like any part of this web workshop where you're not teaching us to cheat off ourselves? But this is what the web is like now. You see something cool on somebody's WordPress site, you try and figure out where they got the plugin, where'd they get the code, borrow the code, get the same plugin, put it in your site. Nobody cares. Guys, just get your site running. It's all about content, which up to this point in this course, haven't spent a lot of time on content yet, okay? We're going to start talking more about that next class. Yes?
Did you put on the body? Sorry, I can't see the bottom.
Yes, it's the body still open. It was before the body closed. And make sure you don't pick up the body tags from step 16 of containers. Just get div ID wrap to the close of that. Do that and save it, and then what you'll have is this. You'll have the page you built, and then you'll have those divs sitting there down at the bottom waiting for stuff to be put in them. Your job then is to take your content. So I'll just give you one example. Here's a list. Starts here, closes here. Let's say I wanted to put the list in the side nav area. Go into where that text is and put your own content in there. You see what I did there? And this is all going to be in my video, my new fresh one that see what just happened there? Move my list, took it out of there, put it in the div. Move all your content in there, shift it around, change the width, change the sizing, play with it. I'm not going to do it for you. That's as far as I'm going. In the 25-minute video for my personal portfolio, I do go even farther, okay? But ultimately, what I'm looking for is that you've taken the divs and all the content you already created and just put it in there and started to use the divs. And you have to do it on all 4 pages, including your contact page. If you just leave the table on the contact page, you will lose points on your web workshop, which leads me to my final note for today, which is now that this is close to the due date, you should be aware of the kind of instructor I am. If you go into content, and depending on whether or not you're in the online course, this might be listed in your week 3 content. It might be listed in this module called weeks 1 through 3. But wherever it's going to be, I have the rubric for the web workshop posted. I've had it posted the entire time, by the way. So going into this, before you turn it in, and this is due for you guys Sunday at 11:59 p.m. It might be different if you're watching this video, it's probably the same due date. Click on that. This goes through every single thing I'm going to be looking for and breaks it up between the steps and the mypp site. And the reason I bring this up is because I do leave 8 points at the very end for creativity. So yes, you can do this perfectly, and that doesn't include just changing the colors. Changing the colors and enhancing the CSS is part of your CSS points here. Creativity would be the people who have really gone in and spent a lot of time like playing with the CSS and making their site actually look like a site, or just going nuts with it. Because this website, you should know, is not meant to look like a legitimate website that we'll be launching. This was meant to get you guys comfortable with a little bit of basic code. So at the end of it, if you want to make it look like a legit website, that's fine. I mean, I've had people come to me with web workshops that look like full-on WordPress sites, but you don't have to do that. You just have to demonstrate to me you've tried to play around with the code a little bit. You made some of your own classes, which isn't even a requirement in my personal portfolio. You've added like custom backgrounds, stuff like that will get you those creativity points. If you just go and change the colors and you put your stuff where it's supposed to be and you do everything you're supposed to do on each page, you're going to get a 92 and you're still going to get an A+. You just might not get way up into the, the high 90s, because that creativity mark is, I have to have something in an assignment like this where I reward the people that have gone the extra mile, so to speak. And I've had students argue with me about this. They're like, this isn't like you guys have all these other classes where you have papers and projects and the grading's all very arbitrary. So students like my course because they're like, look, this is like, cut and dry. But sorry guys, I have 8 points of those types of marks on this one. I'm the professor, okay? I'm doing it. So play around with it a little bit, make it look cool. You'll get some of those marks, okay? That's it. That's Module 4. And that took me a little longer than I wanted it to. Holy cow. But you really got a good presentation of it there. You guys should be good to go, okay? I'll see you at the next class.